This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from the UN Climate Summit in Katowice, Poland, just an hour's drive from Krakow, and about the same distance from Auschwitz, the largest Nazi concentration camp of World War II. Nearly 1 million Jews died in the camp. Here in Katowice, world leaders are gathered for the final few days of the 24th annual UN Climate Conference. Officials from nearly 200 countries are here to negotiate how to implement the 2015 Paris Agreement. But 3 years after Paris, countries appear no closer to curbing global emissions and halting catastrophic climate change. New studies show global carbon emissions may have risen as much as 3.7% in 2018, marking the second annual increase in a row. One recent report likened rising emissions to a, quote, speeding freight train. As the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that humanity has only a dozen years to mitigate climate change or face global catastrophe, we begin today's show with a woman who's already felt the harrowing effects of climate change, is dedicating her life to climate activism as a result. Joanna Sustento's life was turned upside down in 2013 when Typhoon Haiyan, one of the strongest cyclones in recorded history, devastated her country, the Philippines, killing 5 members of her family and thousands of others. This is Joanna telling her story to Greenpeace Philippines.
From the biggest of tragedies, hope can be found. My name is Joanna Sustento. I had a happy life, a good job, great friends, and a wonderful, loving family. But in a matter of minutes, all of that changed. For those who experienced Haiyan, the strongest typhoon ever recorded, it was apocalyptic. I witnessed my mother, my father, brother, sister-in-law, and my 3-year-old nephew being swept away by the storm surge. It left my brother and me to search for our family's bodies in the aftermath. We never found our father and our nephew. It's difficult to be the one left behind. You have to deal with all the questions, the grief, the pain, and the regrets. Typhoon Haiyan killed more than 10,000 people and left over 14 million people homeless. But it's not just statistics and numbers in a news report. This is about us, the people.
Filipina climate activist Joanna Sustento. Since Typhoon Haiyan, she's focused her fight against climate change on the world's biggest polluters. They're called the carbon majors, the 47 fossil fuel companies responsible for nearly a quarter of all greenhouse gases. She says they're legally responsible for the death of her family members. She's here in Katowice, Poland for the UN Climate Summit. Joanna Sustento, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I remember so vividly 5 years ago when we were actually here in the same country, Poland, in Warsaw, when Jeb Sanyo, who was heading the Philippines delegation,
Yes,
spoke to the world. We're going to play that in a minute. But if you can talk about where you were on that day and tell us what happened.
So 5 years ago, on November 8, 2013, I was actually at home with my family. So there was 7 of us living in that house. And as early as 5 a.m., we were already awake because of the strong wind and the rain. And it was in the Philippines, we experience an average of 20 typhoons per year. But it was the first time that we felt such intensity to the point that we can feel our house vibrate because of the pressure. And there was a distinct howling in the wind that was, we've never experienced that before. And that was also the time when it was the first time we experienced storm surge. For the height was like 15 to 20 feet. We had no choice but to go out of our house.
And you were with?
I was with my parents, my eldest brother, two of my older brothers, my sister-in-law, and my 3-year-old nephew. There was 7 of us in that house. So basically, we didn't have a choice but to just go out of the house, because if we stay there, we would be trapped inside. And we got separated from each other while battling the strong winds, the rain, and the storm surge. And in just 2 hours, everything was damaged, everything was taken away from us.
Had water risen?
Yes, it rose for about 15 to 20 feet.
Who were you with outside?
My whole family. My whole family, we decided to go out of the house. And
You were holding on to each other?
we were holding on to our window grills. And then the strategy was we would wait for the storm surge to rise up to the roof, so it would be easier for us to go up. But since there were plenty of debris floating, animals like birds, frogs, snakes, rats were floating with us in the surge. And it was hitting us as well. We couldn't also see what was really happening because everything was so hazy, and it was as if crushed ice were being thrown at our face. So at some point, all of us were separated from each other, but I was together with my parents during their last minutes of their lives. I saw my father while we were floating and we were holding onto a log. My father drowned, and then he surfaced, and then I saw him drown again, and then he surfaced, and then he drowned, and then I never saw him again. And that's when I focused myself on my mom. There was a refrigerator floating in front of us. So I decided to grab onto the refrigerator so that we could stay afloat. So my mom held onto it as well. But the waves were so strong, it was crashing onto the refrigerator, and I was being pushed under the steel trusses of a building nearby our house. So the water was, the steel trusses of the building was up here on my head, and the water was up here.
And the water was
I-
to your nose.
Yes, I was being trapped. So I decided to just push the refrigerator away from the building and hold on to it. And I looked for other things to keep me afloat. But that's when my mom and I got separated from each other. And I felt like I was being spun inside a washing machine. It was very hard for me to surface again because there were plenty of debris blocking my head. I tried to surface, but I just couldn't. And at some point, it was very exhausting for me to try to survive. But I felt that when I pushed my head, I felt air. So I just used both my hands to push all the things that were blocking my head. And I actually used, I think it was a door, I'm not sure. I used the thing that was blocking my head to float. And then I saw my mom and I drifted towards her. I held her arms and I tried to lift half of her body so she could hold on to the wood I was using to stay afloat. But when my hand slipped from her arms to her fingers, her body splashed into the water and there was just no sign of her struggling to survive. So I just hugged her and I kept on calling her, but she didn't respond anymore. And that's when I realized that my mom was gone. I just held on to her and let the storm surge take us. And then at some point, it was very exhausting to be carrying her lifeless body. And that I had to make a decision. If I am going to hold on to my mom, I would also die because the current of the water was very strong. But if I let her go, I will live. But will I ever be able to live with that decision that I wasn't able to save what was left of my family?
But your mother was dead.
So I decided that I was able to survive that storm, and my parents would want me to continue and to choose to be alive despite all of that. So I had no choice but to just let her go. And then I just climbed up the steel frames of a water tank and I stayed there until the wind and the water receded. And then someone just helped me come down from the steel frames. And then I asked what time it was, and he said that it was about 9 a.m. And then I remembered that the water started to rise in our house. It was 7, so it was 2 hours.
In fact, 10,000 people died in that 2 hours.
More than 10,000 people died.
And your other family members, your brothers, your nephew?
My eldest brother, his wife, and his son, they weren't able to survive the storm either. So right now, it's just me and my older brother.
At that time that you were struggling for your life, the UN summit was taking place right here in Poland, and Yeb Sanyo was beside himself. Yeb Sanyo, the Philippines' top climate negotiator 5 years ago. This is Yeb addressing the 2013 UN Climate Conference in Warsaw just after the Typhoon Haiyan devastated the Philippines.
Haiyan and its impacts represent a sobering reminder to the international community that we cannot afford to delay climate action. Warsaw must deliver on enhancing ambition and should muster the political will to address climate change and build that important bridge towards Peru and Paris. It might be said that it must be poetic justice that the Typhoon Haiyan was so big that its diameter spanned the distance between Warsaw and Paris. Mr. President, in Doha, we asked, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? But here, in Warsaw, we may very well ask these same forthright questions. What my country is going through as a result of this extreme climate event is madness. The climate crisis is madness. Mr. President, we can stop this madness right here in Warsaw.
That was Yeb Sanyo speaking as the lead climate negotiator for the Philippines in 2013. Through that UN climate summit, he wept, he fasted. The next year, the UN climate summit was held in Lima, Peru. And just before he was headed to Peru, he learned he would no longer be on the delegation. Our guest is Joanna Sustento, climate activist from Tacloban. Also, Yeb did not know what had happened to his family members, and your family knew Yeb's family.
Yes. Yeb's brother, A.G. Sanyo, is actually my brother's friend. And A.G. was supposed to stay at our house the night before the typhoon struck. But he decided to stay in a hotel, and I couldn't imagine if A.G. was in our house and he would also experience the same extent of the struggle to survive.
In fact, we spoke with both A.G. and Yeb in the coming summits as they described their own experience.
Yes.
You have called Typhoon Haiyan a violation of human rights. Talk about that. Why?
Typhoon Haiyan and all the other storms that passed after Haiyan, as a result of climate change, is a violation of human rights, because whenever extreme weather events happen, especially in my country, the Philippines, we lose the basic human right to a safe environment. We lose the right to live. We lose the right to live. We lose our right to livelihood. We lose our right to education because schools get damaged. And whenever there are typhoon warnings, our classes get suspended. And can you imagine students having to go through that? We lose our human dignity. To just have that mental health, because we after the storm we did not have that space to grieve and to just feel what we want to feel. We lost everything, but we didn't have that space because we were so busy for survival. We were busy looking for food, for water, for family members.
So talk about how you went from this climate catastrophe, a climate survivor, losing 5 members of your family, to becoming a climate activist, coming to global gatherings like these, and now taking on what's called the carbon majors, the 47 fossil fuel companies that are responsible for some quarter of the fossil fuels emitted through history, fossil fuel emissions.
Well, I could say that what we've experienced back home, Typhoon Haiyan, it became that turning point because a year after the onslaught of Haiyan, we were again anticipating another super typhoon. And as I remember as I was packing my things, because we were preparing to evacuate to a safer place, I just felt so exhausted, and I just thought, is this it? Is this the life that I'm going to be living from now on? Are we just going to wait for another catastrophe to happen? Are we just going to count the casualties, the injured, the missing? Are we just going to wait for relief and aid from foreign countries every time we are met by these catastrophes? And I cannot imagine living a life like that. It's exhausting. It's a great injustice because we are not responsible for this. I do not want my future family, my future children to go through what I've been through, because no one deserves that. And that's when I realized that everything was taken away by that storm. But I was able to survive that for a reason. And I promised myself that I will never stop finding what that reason is. Sorry. And I realized that despite everything, our community, we have gained a powerful story to tell. Because our experiences, our stories, it could put a human face on the numbers, on the statistics of climate change. And I believe that these global conferences, human stories have that power to change the current system.
Right now, a Human Rights Commission in the Philippines is trying to determine if corporate polluters should be held accountable for the loss of life linked to their business model. Can you describe this investigation that's underway and also a lawsuit against the carbon majors?
This petition was filed in the year 2015 by typhoon survivors, fisherfolk, farmers, and other environmental organizations at the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines to investigate 47 oil, coal, and gas companies into their responsibility for human rights violations resulting from climate change. Now it is already the 6th public hearing in the Philippines, actually. So we gather scientists, researchers who have the facts backed by climate science.
And what you say to people who say you can never prove any one hurricane is related to climate change.
Yes, of course.
And yet, the intensity, the frequency.
Yes, it has been getting more extreme, getting more frequent. And with the help of our community witnesses in the Philippines, they are also put to the stand, and they have the chance to share how climate change impacted their lives, their livelihood, their.
Have companies tried to shut down the investigation, some of these fossil fuel companies?
So far, none of them have showed up. So they are ignoring, blatantly ignoring, as what they've been doing for the past decades, because they knew of the consequences of their business practices, but they didn't do well. They did something about it. They paid billions of dollars to individuals so that they deny climate science. And that's just, they blatantly deceived the whole world.
Have you been participating in some of the protests here? And also the issue that's so interesting of protests that are taking place, yet those who protest in this conference center in Poland, this is part of a UN deal, a conference center that, by the way, is shaped like a coal mine and sits on an old coal mine, coal mine area. Protesters are not allowed to name names of corporations they're protesting.
I have been participating like in the climate march,
I saw that.
and I've also seen plenty of activists with whom I share the same advocacy. And
can you name some of the names of the companies, the 47 carbon majors?
Shell, BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Suncor, Lukoil. That's just some of the 40s. Well, there are actually 90 big companies all over the world. But 47 companies are present in the Philippines.
We just have 30 seconds left. What do you want to see come out of this conference, and talk about your life's dedication at this point, your life's mission?
Honestly, at this point, I am not expecting anything from the COP, but having journeyed with fellow activists here, I see that there is so much power in the people out there. There is so much power for them to create that pressure to our governments, to our corporations, to change the current system. And through their stories, through our stories, we can change that global mindset.
I want to thank you so much for being with us. Again, our condolences for your family, for the Philippines, and for so many other countries. We're going to talk more about this all through this week as we broadcast from the UN Climate Summit. Joanna Sustento, climate activist from Tacloban, Philippines. Typhoon Haiyan survivor, lost 5 members of her family, and so many more in her community. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, chasing the story, Democracy Now! Tries to question a top climate advisor to President Trump. Stay with us.